So I'm watching something different from all the recent movies because of course it's diversity is best really with regards to anything. So ironically, the one genre that I haven't touched that much recently is the horror genre. Yeah, it was very ironic, considering it's the one I used to watch mostly in the past. So I went back to it. But it's not quite, you know, um, well, it's one type of horror, I suppose. It's like a battle royale, I suppose. I've never heard of it before though. But apparently it's directed by Ringo's director, so there are certain expectations, I suppose one might say. I don't know. Apparently, also directed a Death Note movie, and incidentally, it's the second time I watched this actor that acted in that as Light in though that the live action franchise specifically. Yeah. I also watch another actor for the second time as well. From one of the sisters in Our Little Sister. Yeah, watched it a few months ago now. I think it's been months. Yeah, obviously totally different from that. Absolutely totally different. So yeah, first thoughts about this. I mean, at first it seemed like it's totally innocuous. I mean, in comparison to many other battle royales, in comparison to Death Bell as such, that I've watched recently, sort of similar to that, not quite, but guess I guess it's also sort of similar to Boku no. It's animated though. Yeah, and but not quite as vicious. They all have different focus, different sort of focus, but not quite as vicious. And then there's also one missed call, I suppose. Yeah, but that only became but sort of better morale in the third movie or so because before then, I guess people just died if they got the call. Not much else to it, from what I remember. This is slightly more subtle, it seems. It's not quite horror like Ringo was. It's a different kind of thing, yeah. But or Dark Water. It's the same director as Dark Water, which is also another subtle horror. So I suppose he does do subtle horror, as Ringo is as well. It's all subtle. When it comes to Battle Royale, so it's a bit difficult to be subtle, but this one is managing so far. I mean, it's I've nearly watched 40 minutes, so that makes it subtle, I suppose, considering. Yeah. But yeah, so far, it made sense in a way. I can see where the battle sort of consists of stuff. So at first they say it's a psychological thing. They're going to measure something to do with psychology. They don't say what. Of course, in any ethical experiment, one does need to say what they're measuring. Although, of course, there are certain psychological experiments where that is inherently impossible to do unless one is willing to not have real data. Because sometimes an experiment does need to be essentially, but that is, I suppose, why double-blind studies exist in order to be able to do these sort of, using double-blind by inherently people do not know which is which. But anyway, this is a movie, so let's just discount scientific reality for now. So yeah, it seems like the psychology is regarding the open doors primarily, it seems. So after the first murder occurred, it seems like that is primarily the thing, right? So obviously, I forgot what his name is inside this movie, but the actor that played Light, yeah, he got an early visit from the one next door. Obviously, she meant him no harm, but that must have been shown to indicate to the audience that it's very insecure, and I suppose it is. So the audience now knows that they're only really secure just before they go to sleep and throughout the night apparently. But yeah, if someone I guess sleeps too much, then they might be liable to get jumped on. So I suppose someone figured it out and committed the murder. Of course, like in any neo noir or you know any detective movie, you need a motive. And when it comes to the guy that was murdered, I suppose it's not hard to see why they could have a motive because he was the most gossipy one out of the 10. So I suppose they must have, and yeah, of course. Now that I think of it, from what the audience knows at least, I cannot really base it on anything else. You know, the so-called doctor accused one of the other guys there. Um, I'm assuming based on the fact that he smiled as soon as saying it, presumably. But he hasn't said so far what he bases his accusation on. But I'm thinking there's also, I mean, based on what the audience knows and what is most likely, it could be the older woman as well. Um, because he accused her of being someone who was recently fired from some school or such. So she has purpose, I suppose. Whereas the other guy just simply smiled or something that's not an incredible amount of motive by itself, is it? I mean, that's not a motive. That's just something suspicious, I suppose. But it could be just someone who, instead of screaming, just decides to smile for some reason. It's not something many people do, but I suppose some might react inappropriately like that. Personally, I hate screaming, no matter what for what reason. But I suppose if you do come across someone who's just been murdered, then I suppose it is the most, I suppose, appropriate. Ideally, there's not a lot of screaming in movies, but anyway. Uh, the older movement, though, I'm thinking, is the one most likely, but we'll see what will happen now, I suppose. Yeah. So, but also with regards, though, to when they said that they don't want to show their weapons because otherwise the murderer might target those that who the one who's weak, the weakest. Well, first of all, I mean that didn't happen. First of all, he did. I mean, he didn't know that the person who he was going to murder only had a poison pill, did they? I mean, it's a bit weird to suggest that knowing that. I mean, they didn't mention that, but based on what we have seen so far and what's logical, that's because if I find a gun in one of my boxes and I don't know, I'd assume that everyone has the same. I'm assuming. I don't know. Unless the at least two boxes have something different, then one can only assume that they all have the same thing. And that's the most likely scenario, right? Unless at least two boxes have something different, which we find out after the morning, after on day two. But they didn't know that. So how did they just risk it? Did they take a chance? They Because otherwise, obviously, they might have ended in a shootout, and both could be dead or something. Anyway, also with regards to not showing though, because otherwise, though, it's a very weird sort of logic though, because if like, imagine if all countries in the world did that. I mean, sure, there are some countries that hide some things, but most don't. Most just say that they have, however many. Like even with nukes in particular, they just say. I mean, sure, some might hide, but um, what I'm assuming most do not hide. Otherwise, why would most countries say that they have none? I mean, if most countries didn't do that, lied about their numbers, then they presumably say that they do have some at least, even if it's only one or something, just for the heck of it, right? But they don't. So I wonder if that, because the computer voice did say that this is a microcosm of a society. Now, I don't know if that's society in general, but and even if we just include societies on their own, so like for example, a state in the U.S. I mean, there's many states. They all have different laws and such, but there are states that have like an open carry policy. So that's so presumably people there generally think that everyone knowing what kind of weapon you have does actually act as a deterrent. So essentially, this movie is saying that the opposite is true. I mean, I suppose in this sense, in this context, it does make something of a sense because if people have ridiculous sort of weapons, I don't know, maybe even toy weapons or something, that maybe someone has a toy gun instead of a real gun, possibly. Then yeah, obviously that's an obvious risk. I suppose yeah, if everyone has a gun, then everyone has a gun. But then even then, I mean, guns generally, I'm assuming some are more affected than others, presumably. I'm assuming most actual guns are lethal, so suppose there's that. And these might have weapons that aren't lethal, but yeah, I don't know. It's a weird experiment, to be fair. I actually haven't seen the original Battle Royale, like literally the one that's called Battle Royale. I haven't seen it. Strange. I've seen many others that presumably had spawned after the original. I haven't seen the original. I mean, obviously, there's the more popular Western, I'm assuming, Hunger Games. Um, the I've seen. I think I've only seen the first one though. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So far it's intriguing. I suppose one might say it's different from Ring and Dark Water, but it's intriguing nonetheless. So like I don't like battle royales. When it comes to games, though, it's very competitive, I suppose one might say. Alright, so I finished it, and uh, it's fairly typical of its genre. It's not really doesn't break the mold much as such, except of course it's has a few twists at the end, but it's still not incredibly unique. Um, in terms of sociology, it doesn't say much else except that humans can end up fighting each other and such. Obviously, even in under circumstances that aren't necessarily a jungle, are they? That's really the only difference. Whereas most others, like man, the earliest, I suppose, sort of, even before Battle Royale ever existed,